That was David Schweikert, the Loyola philosophy professor and fellow activist. His book was After Capitalism, which we have on our shelves here at the Heartland General Store. You are back listening to Live from the Heartland. We're up here on the stage at the Heartland Cafe like we are every Saturday morning with smells of turkey bacon and I think some real bacon.
Nah, we ran out yesterday.
Oh, we did.
And they're
Okay.
waiting to slaughter another hog before we get more.
Oh, thank you for that image, Michael.
Well, graphic
I do
details.
also smell the buckwheat cakes sizzling on the grill. So you have a couple of announcements before we go to our esteemed
I want
guests,
everyone to
Michael?
get ready for we're all born athletes. It gets taken out of us, but we're involved with a group called Athletes United for Peace, and we promote friendship and unity through sport. And there is the first race of the season called the Heartland Sweetheart Run. It's a 5K run, and you meet here at the Heartland by 8 o'clock. It will take place on February 12th. That's a Sunday, and that will be also a day we're going to celebrate and remember the great emancipator Abraham Lincoln. So everybody get ready, come and run. More information will be available shortly. And I did want to let everyone know that tonight at the Heartland Cafe we have a Cuban group called Los Perros Cubanos, and they'll be doing some wonderful music tonight at the Heartland Cafe. There's lots of other things going on, but that's enough for right now. So good morning to you, Mick Dumke.
Good morning, guys.
Hey,
good to see you.
What a treat to have you. Mick, we've read your articles for now a number of years. You look way too young to be who you are, writing what you do. And also to be the guy that was threatened, that moved our calm, demeanored mayor, former mayor, into shaking a gun at you.
That's
I
right.
didn't hear that story.
Inspired him.
Can you tell that story?
I don't know if I should have started with that, Mick, but I just...
Yeah, that's supposed to be sort of my climactic moment
that's right.
here,
Well,
I guess.
see, we do things a little reversed.
That's right.
Here at the
So what
Heartland.
happened?
You'll remember it when he tells you, but
Yeah, this was,
in the spring,
a couple, about a year ago or so, right? It was a year ago? I think so.
Almost,
You lose
yeah.
track of time, but...
it was after Ron was elected.
Actually, it was about 2 years ago. It was.
It was 2 years
Right,
ago.
exactly.
Okay,
good. Truly proving that we lose track of time. And incidentally, on that young thing,
Yeah.
I first came to the Heartland Cafe as a college freshman in 1989.
You were-
when I was an
you look
undergraduate
way
at
younger.
Northwestern, so a little older than you're suggesting
he
here.
He still looks
but
like a college guy, you guys.
Thanks for that.
That's good.
It's the
You
good
can-
food he's
you
been
can
eating all
sneak
these years.
around.
That's right.
You can
Good,
sneak-
healthy food at the Heartland Cafe and elsewhere. So this was a couple years ago. As most people who've lived in Chicago and followed not just Chicago politics but national politics know, Mayor Daley, was a fierce advocate of gun control.
Right.
And whatever side you're on of that particular debate, that was definitely something he was known for, and he took Chicago's, at the time, their handgun ban all the way to the Supreme Court and fought that for a long time. Long story short, again, I don't have to tell other people who live here that we still continue to have problems with violence in this city, a national leader in that dubious category. And so a couple years ago, Mayor Daley was holding a press conference to talk about all the things that his administration was doing to continue to put the handgun ban or keep the handgun ban in place. And sort of as a demo, he had a table next to him at this press conference full of guns that he said the Chicago police had seized off the street, illegal guns. They weren't all handguns, by the way, as I came to know, because for a moment I became the darling of the NRA, which was not necessarily the most comfortable position
Nor
for
your
me to be
intention.
in. Right, certainly not my intention. So, Mayor Daley's having this press conference talking about all these things the city was doing, and the night before there'd been a dozen shootings. It was a warm spring night. We know how this goes.
Right.
And so I raised my hand and asked what I thought was the obvious question. Given the fact that we still have all these problems with violence, how effective do you think that the gun law is? And I say this not because I'm someone who thinks that we should have more guns on the street, but just because this is...
Just because it's the obvious question.
It's the obvious question, and also, no politician should be allowed to simply get away with talking about all the wonderful things he's doing when on the ground the problems persist, especially one this serious.
See, Richie didn't know that rule. Richie never heard that rule.
No, he was
No
not
politician should
pleased
get away.
with the question.
Are you kidding? So what happened next did make the night news.
He did. It did. So the mayor
Answered the question.
was moved, inspired. You can choose your verb to lean over and grab. What I was later told was a Russian semi-automatic rifle. And it also happened to have a bayonet on the end that was roughly a foot and a half long. So he picked this up, cameras are rolling, mind you, and looked at me and said, "I'll show you how effective the law is." Ha ha ha. And he, if you've ever heard former Mayor Daley, he has a sort of nervous laugh when he's telling a quote-unquote joke. Yeah. That closely resembles Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah.
And so
he said,
"I'll show you how effective this is. Ha 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 ha. I'll put this gun right up your, your butt.
Blank. Yeah, he said
la,
it.
la.
And then I'll fire off a couple rounds."
He said it.
He said that. So he generously offered to shove a gun up my rear end
to
fire off a couple rounds. And the room went silent. Stunned silence. And afterward, I walked out of there and I said, "I think that the mayor just threatened to shoot me." And by the time I got back to my office, it was already all over the place.
And everybody greeted you with what? They stood up and applauded.
That they did. Actually, there was,
you're a hell of a hero.
That's right.
So,
well, Mick, you say you went to Northwestern. Where do you come from, and how did you get into being an investigative reporter and a muckraking journalist?
Well, thanks for all that. I want to be all those things, so it's nice to have somebody throw those words my way. I grew up in Southwest Michigan, little town St. Joseph. Some people occasionally go there for the beach in the summer. And came over here, like I said, to go to NU. Actually studied religion, not journalism. And did a few other things along the way.
Hallelujah.
Exactly. Taught in an alternative high school.
Which
worked
one?
in a Sullivan House down in South Shore.
Oh.
Now they're in South Chicago.
Wow.
Worked in a homeless ministry downtown at Fourth Presbyterian Church. Went to seminary, got an MDiv, and then ended up working at the Chicago Reporter. That's where I sort of started my journalism career in Chicago, and I've just been kicking around for a number of years, and at the Reader now since about 2005.
Well, the Chicago Reporter is a righteous rag for many, many years, really doing the work that some straight-ahead news wouldn't just.
Isn't there a Chicago journalist group that you were involved with too, or some collection I read somewhere, or something that you had crossed the street and gone back to the Reader? Or was that from the?
Yeah, I left the Reader for about a year. Went to the Chicago News Cooperative.
That was how I met, yeah.
So got the experience of, writing about our, esteemed elected officials in the New York Times, which is great. But came back to the Reader, where, I'm sort of encouraged to do my thing, doing the investigative.
Well, you've been doing your thing. You've written a lot of wonderful articles. What's the top on your list right now as an issue that you see happening and some events that you would like to share that you're looking into or you've already just reported on?
Well, so many things, of course, going on here at once, but I'd say a lot of us are looking at different angles of the NATO and G8 summits that are coming up this spring, so I'm certainly keeping an eye on how that's all proceeding. People probably out there are aware that the mayor already got the city council to sort of give him the authorization to issue contracts without much oversight in advance of those summits, to change some of the rules and regulations for protests and demonstrations, things like that. So we're already sort of seeing the typical Chicago politics in action even a few months before those summits. You guys may know, too, along with my colleague Ben Jarofsky, I've been writing over the last 6 months or so a fair amount about our drug enforcement policies in Chicago, particularly looking at the impacts of the way the police use marijuana possession laws to essentially do searches and snatch guys up in African-American neighborhoods, and even in primarily white neighborhoods. It's still, African-Americans who are the folks who are getting picked up for this, for something that, let's be honest, is an ordinance or a law that people are violating with regularity all over the city, but it's only enforced selectively. So essentially we have official sanction for what I say is just completely racially disparate policies and criminal justice.
Let me say thank you for pointing that out and never stopping pointing that out. Michael and I both come at our social activism based on an awareness of the inequity and the racism of America, which some people think we're all done with dealing, and not by a long shot. You also joined, when you called Ben Jarabsky your partner, is it too personal to ask? Are you guys jump into TIFs together, not anything else, right?
We've done a bunch of stuff together. Yeah, the parking. Yeah, I see what you're saying here. Getting the joke. No, we are friends. We and colleagues.
I can't believe you, Katie.
We live in separate residences. If that's what you're getting at. But we do collaborate on on things like we looked at the parking meter deal. People haven't forgotten about that because how can they forget? Some of you may have had to feed the private company's coffers on your way in this morning. Like you said, the tax increment financing program, which is something Ben has been reporting about for years.
Ben did a great service for many, many years.
Absolutely.
But I think you've picked that up as well. And
we've worked together on some stuff. Ben is such a great storyteller, and he sort of have looked at this program sort of neighborhood by neighborhood, deal by deal, how this has gone wrong. And where I jumped in with him is we sort of started looking at it at an aggregate level. Because I'm kind of a wonky guy. I grabbed this data, club the city over the head with the Freedom of Information Act and try to make them.
We love wonkiness.
Yeah, well, you got to do your thing.
I love clubbing the city over the head with freedom of information.
Exactly. So this is an economic development program that's not doing much economic development in neighborhoods that need it the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Originally it was supposed to be for blighted areas. Now we have a city pretty much blanketed with TIFs, but all along the commercial strips of almost altogether okay neighborhoods.
Exactly.
Like the Loop, say.
Exactly.
You are listening to WLUW 88.7's Live from the Heartland show, and we're here every Saturday morning at 9 to 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. You can look at earlier editions at youtube.com/heartlandmedia, and we're glad to have you listening in. We're talking with Mick Dumke, reporter. We're talking about the city. I'd like to ask you, you've talked about the city council kind of going along with the mayor's new rules, even though around the upcoming G8 NATO demonstrations. What is the relationship between the council today and the mayor? Did they just give him a kind of an early on pass with the budget and with this kind of legislation? Is there real opposition, or because he talks to what were the outside aldermen or the progressive aldermen more than Daley did, does that kind of change the relationship between the so-called progressive aldermen and the mayor?
Pick any question.
That's right. Lots there. But no, your question and your overall point is a good one. I mean, fundamentally, are we saying, is the city council still a rubber stamp? Because it's been a rubber stamp for years. I mean, except conveniently during the period, to get back to our earlier point about race in America, no small topic, the city council suddenly found its independence when we had our first African-American mayor, but before and since it's been a rubber stamp. And I would argue that has continued under the current mayor. In fairness, aldermen, including Joe Moore, whom I like a great deal, and let's get this out of the way, I like most of the aldermen. I know a lot of them personally. They're great people. We're not talking about personalities. We're not talking about whether they're good guys or whether I'd like to have a beer with them. We're talking about politics and what they're doing for us as their constituents and residents of the city. The aldermen would say that on issues like the budget, this last budget, and even on the NATO G8 demonstration regulations, that they pushed back against Rahm Emanuel, and that he gave some things back to them, that he showed a willingness to compromise and to bend.
just
Let him
one
finish.
second. Yeah. But I mean, don't you think he put out there more than he expected to get, as
Well,
a good wheeler dealer would?
For sure.
And
Absolutely.
so
This
he
is-
still has, he's been given, sort of carte blanche for certain contracts, and also for, in terms of civil rights and demonstrating purposes, he can do the rent-a-cop thing. Very scary.
I agree with what you just said. I mean, whether you find it scary or not is obviously a matter of where you stand. But
That's right.
But fundamentally, you're absolutely right. I mean, this guy, Rahm Emanuel, love him or hate him, he is a brilliant politician, and absolutely classic, just smart politics put out there. I mean, not just smart politics, smart negotiations. If you're, trying to buy a used car, you do the same thing. You put out more than you expect to get, and then you can come back and say, well, I gave a little bit.
That's
and you
right.
still got way more than you would have if the city council wasn't, frankly, such a pushover. So this
you.
budget that they passed still, cut the library budget, cut the mental health services. Public health department is essentially supposed to be privatized this year. Water and sewer rates are up, which is a tax hike. You can say it's not a tax hike, but it is, because you're paying more for a basic service. Moreover, it's a regressive tax hike because it impacts low-income households far more than the rest of us. It's not like you can go without water and sewer service. So anyway, all these things still happen in the budget, and the alderman pointed to a few little things. Well, he threw us a few bones here and there.
Right.
The truth is, they ended up voting for this thing 50-0. You mean really not one person? That laundry list of things I just ran through, not one person objected enough to say, no, I'm not going to vote for this budget. I mean, I find that just breathtaking.
Why do you think
I'm with you.
they jumped in bed with him, so to speak?
Well, Alderman told me privately that, this guy was sort of putting the full court press on. He wanted, he wanted an overwhelming vote in favor of his first budget. I mean, first year as mayor, the first budget he's introduced, he's tried to paint himself as a reformer. He's tried to paint himself as a guy who's willing to sit down and work with the city council. So he really wanted to send a message that this was a good deal for everybody, especially since it had all these tough, hard to swallow provisions in it.
Mick, do you see any real significant pushback coming from any aldermen or any community organizations, sectors of the Black, Latino, progressive community? You think there will be a stand up to the mayor at any point? What about labor? I mean, they've been getting squeezed and pressured a lot. Do you see the ranks, any fomenting activity on the horizon?
Well, I think that the NATO G8 regulations they pushed through really touched a nerve, because very interesting. This was about a week and a half ago. It was up before the city council. And initially, again, let's be fair, initially the Emanuel administration imposed a huge increase in, for instance, the fines if you're arrested for resisting arrest.
Protesting.
Essentially for protesting in a way that subjectively, police officers said you're not supposed to be protesting. He did back down on that under pressure from aldermen and from various community groups. But to your point, Michael, the sort of ad hoc coalition of people who showed up to protest those regulations was very interesting and very impressive, ranging from organized labor to community groups to right-to-life organizations. I mean, these are not people who, normally
march together.
Exactly. But, they all were united by opposition to what they saw as not just the specifics of these regulations and potential First Amendment questions, but I actually think more broadly what they saw as sort of a power grab by the mayor.
Absolutely. And the Occupy movement was in your face about all of this as well, but I do believe that if we are going to see something useful happen in the next year, even according to what our previous guest David Schweikert was talking about in terms of changing the economy into something more appropriate, people have to stop being afraid, starting with the city council members who couldn't bring themselves to cast a ballot against it, to people sitting at home believing that their arms are going to fall off if they go out on the street and say, I'm sick of this and won't take it anymore. We have a populace really cowed in their homes with the TV and the sports, and just atomized, using, again, David's
I
word.
do confess to watching the Bulls win last night.
Okay, that's good for the confession. But I'm wondering if we're going to see, I mean, Rahm jumping out and doing all this, asking for authorization to clamp down on protests, to me reminds me, you weren't here, but in 1968, Old Man Daley jumping ahead of the protesters saying, they're going to put LSD in our water, which I wish they had. But, no one, of course, had any plans to do that, but we had Abby Hoffman on the scene. He'd say anything to rile up the mayor. We don't have Abby Hoffman on the scene now. We have a lot of people who actually have thoughtful protests to make in front of G8. We also probably have some crazies who will show up. But now he's sort of pushed everybody into the crazy bin, which to me threatens democracy the most of all, because it makes people afraid to get out and stand up for their rights, because they think they'll be, categorized as crazies or dangerous people, when really it's as American as it gets to stand up.
You got a question for Mick there?
Yeah, no, I agree. I'll just say, I totally agree with you,
Good
Katie.
question.
I mean, I'll say this, though, from the other standpoint. I don't think it's just that people are afraid. I also think people are overwhelmed. They're tired.
Yeah.
Everybody's working. If you're lucky enough to have a job,
That's
you're
right.
doing the work of 2 or 3 people.
That's right.
And so people don't even know where to start. I think that those folks who are organizers and who are on the front lines of this, and thank you for raising your voices, even if I don't agree with you, thank you for raising your voices.
Amen to that.
But I do hope that the sort of broad range of protest movement, from the Occupy movement to the stuff we're seeing around NATO G8, I hope that it gets, and this is very difficult, as you guys know, but I hope that it gets sort of coherent about a specific thing or two, specific issues. I think people find it easier to rally around issues than to protest. I mean, it's easier to protest against something, but ultimately it'll go somewhere, it'll go farther if there are particular issues that it's pushing.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a matter of political strategy, if you're just out there like Rahm Emanuel is clamping down on First Amendment rights, he's a bully, he's arrogant, all those things, even if you agree with they're true, it's still sort of mushy. You need to have an issue or two where you're really
Well,
pushing
what about
him
the whole,
on.
just the economic breakdown? I think that, asking the occupiers to get specific or to name a leader has been the role